Picture it. Stockholm, 1907. A woman stands in a studio painting giant spirals, glowing symbols, floating shapes, cosmic diagrams, strange flowers, and abstract forms that look like science, religion, biology, and outer space all crashed into each other during a séance. And here's the wild part. She is doing this before Kandinsky, before Mondrian, before abstraction supposedly arrives. But the art world barely notices her because Hilma af Klint does something almost unbelievable. She paints the future and then hides it away for decades. And when the world finally opens up the boxes, art history is suddenly faced with a very awkward conversation it needs to have. And the modern art timeline is about to get messy. Welcome to Art Happens, the divine mess of art history, presented by J Squared Atelier. I'm James William Moore, your guide through the masterpieces, scandals, revolutions, and beautifully chaotic plot twists that make art history so fascinating. And today, we're talking about Hilma af Klint, the Swedish artist whose work forces us to rethink one of modern art's favorite stories: who invented abstraction? Because according to the traditional version of art history, a handful of famous men broke away from representation and bravely invented modern abstract painting. And Hilma af Klint, from somewhere beyond the grave, basically responds, "Oh yeah, you're all just catching up." Hilma af Klint was born in Sweden in 1862 and trained formally at the Royal Academy of Fine Art in Stockholm. She could paint landscapes, portraits, botanical studies. She had serious skill. But while she was studying traditional art, she was also deeply involved in spiritualism. And before we laugh too hard at séances and spirit communication, remember, this was the age of X-rays, radio waves, electricity, and scientific discoveries revealing invisible forces everywhere. People were suddenly realizing the world contained things you could not see with the naked eye. So for Hilma, spirituality was not just mystical theater. It was a way of asking, what invisible systems shape existence? What lies beyond ordinary sight? Can art visualize forces we cannot physically see? And honestly, that is a gigantic modern question. She eventually joined a group called the Five women who gathered for spiritual meetings, automatic drawing sessions, and experiments in communication with higher powers. And whether you believe in any of that or not is almost beside the point, because these experiments pushed Hilma away from traditional representation and towards something radically new, not painting the visible world, painting the unseen one. Then, in 1906, Hilma begins the work that changes everything, a massive series called The Paintings for the Temple. And these works are bold, huge, confident, completely abstract. Spirals, geometric forms, symbols, radiant color, strange visual systems that feel part science diagram, part spiritual map, part cosmic blueprint. And the date matters, because this is happening before abstraction is supposed to have happened. Not tiny experiments, not tentative sketches, fully realized abstract paintings years before artists like Vasily Kandinsky became famous for supposedly inventing abstraction. And this is where Hilma af Klint becomes a problem for traditional art history, because she does not fit the heroic modernist narrative. She is not loudly publishing manifestos in Paris cafes. She is not building a public persona around artistic genius. She is not performing modernism for critics and collectors. She is working privately, systematically, spiritually. And art history has a bad habit of overlooking revolutions that do not arrive loudly enough, especially when the revolutionary is a woman. What makes Hilma af Klint so fascinating is that her abstraction comes from a completely different place than the version we usually hear about. Modern art history often frames abstraction as a formal experiment, artists reducing reality into shape, color, and line, breaking painting apart piece by piece. But Hilma's work is not cold or detached. It feels spiritual. Her spirals suggest growth and evolution. Her circles feel cosmic. Her symbols hint at invisible balance between opposites, masculine and feminine, material and spiritual, earthly and divine. She is not trying to escape meaning. She is trying to visualize meaning that cannot easily be spoken. And that changes the conversation completely. Because suddenly, abstraction is not just modern design. It becomes philosophy, mysticism, psychology, energy, faith, wonder. Hilma was not painting emptiness. She was painting systems larger than human vision. And then Hilma makes one of the strangest decisions in modern art history. She decides much of the work should not be shown publicly until at least 20 years after her death. 20 years. This is an artist looking directly at her own moment and saying, nope, you people are not ready for this. And honestly, she's probably right. Because these paintings did not fit comfortably anywhere. Too spiritual for modernism, too abstract for traditional painting, too unconventional for the institutions of her time. So Hilma carefully preserved the work instead. Thousands of paintings, drawings, notebooks, diagrams, not abandoned, archived, like a message sent forward in time. Hilma af Klint dies in 1944, and for decades the work remains largely unseen. Then suddenly, the rediscovery begins. Curators, scholars, artists, people start realizing the scale of what had been hidden away, and then comes the moment that changes everything. People started realizing the scale of what had been hidden away, and then comes the moment that changes everything. The 2018 exhibition, Hilma af Klint, Paintings for the Future, at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, audiences lose their minds because suddenly people are standing inside one of the most famous museums in the world, looking at paintings that feel shockingly contemporary, despite being more than a century old. And with that comes a very uncomfortable realization for the art world. What else has been left out of the story? Who else got pushed aside because they did not fit the preferred narrative? Because Hilma did not become important in the 21st century. The work was already important. The art world just finally caught up. Hilma af Klint reminds us that art history is not fixed. It shifts, it expands, it gets corrected. Her paintings challenge the idea that abstraction was invented by a neat little lineup of famous modernist men marching confidently into the future. Because while the art world was busy building that story, Hilma was already somewhere else entirely, painting invisible worlds, spiritual systems, cosmic diagrams, and visions of a future nobody around her fully understood. And maybe that is the most fascinating part of all. She trusted the future more than her own present. She believed someone, someday, would finally see what she saw. And against all odds, she was right. Because Hilma af Klint did not just paint abstraction, she painted ahead of history itself. Thank you for listening to Art Happens, the divine mess of art history, presented by J Squared Atelier. I'm James William Moore, and if today's episode reminded you that art history still has hidden rooms, missing chapters, and ghosts waiting in the archive, good. That means the mess is working. Be sure to subscribe, follow, and share the show with someone who loves art, mystery, and a good timeline correction. And while you're there, check out our sister podcast, Lattes and Art, where we talk with artists, curators, and creatives about what it really means to make art now. Until next time, keep looking closer, keep questioning the timeline, and remember, art happens long before the world knows what to call it. On a side note, if you've enjoyed listening to my take on art, art history, and the creative process, perhaps you'd like to see the art I create. Madame B, my homage to the mystical world of tarot and fortune-telling, is loading up her crystal ball and hitting the road. The Cloverdale Arts Alliance will be hosting my collection, Madame B's Tarot Readings, from May 16th through July 12th. Join us for an artist reception on Saturday, May 16th at 5:30, and on Sunday, May 17th at 11 a.m., you can be part of a live recording of Lattes and Art when I will be interviewed by Will McCoy, Gallery Director of Cloverdale Arts Alliance. And if you do visit, please introduce yourself. I'd love to meet you and hear your views on how I spend my creative time.